Alright, welcome back. Today I want to talk about a couple of different lenses that I've used on the Sony a6700. I have a whole bunch of random photos and videos that are just piling up on my internal SSD, so I want to clear them out. Thought I would make a video just kind of going over the lenses that I use. So if you're interested in maybe trying out a new look or a new lens just because, maybe you'll find some of these choices interesting. I guess to start off, the only lens of this bunch that I still have is the Canon FD 28mm, so maybe we can start there. All the other lenses I've actually sold, and even the Sony a6700, I've moved on from that. Now I'm shooting on the Nikon Z8 or Z8, and I'm revisiting my lens collection because I'm trying to figure out what I want to shoot in this next year. So we might as well start with the Canon FD 28 since this is the one that I actually have. It being an FD mount, I've adapted it to the Sony E-mount with a K&F concept adapter, FD2NEX. Canon FD lenses I've used on a couple of different cameras now. Really enjoy the look and feel of these lenses. They definitely have more of a vintage rendering, but no matter what camera I throw these in front of, I really do love the image that comes out of it. It is a bit soft for certain projects. I think I started out with throwing a Pro Mist on there actually, and I ended up taking it off because I wanted it to at least have a little bit more detail. But what I particularly like about them, especially for video, is actually the focus throw is not that long. It's very short. So you can't get super granular with the focus, but at the same time, because I'm often shooting by myself, I like that limited distance. It's not too short either. I don't know the exact angle actually, so I'll throw that on screen, but I find it to be a really good balance and just enough. For photos, on the a6700, this obviously being a manual focus lens, a little bit more difficult because the EVF isn't the greatest and the screen on the back, not the best either. So it was a little bit difficult to use to grab focus with, or I felt very slow at the very least when I was using it with the 6700. For video though, it was a pleasure. Just remember to change your IBIS settings, I believe, to 28mm and you'll get some really nice results. What I really like about the 28mm on a crop sensor camera, roughly with a crop factor, the resulting focal length is around 42. So it's a very nice, neutral, natural look, and I thoroughly enjoyed using this lens with the Sony a6700. Next, let's talk about the Voigtlander 35 f2 Ultron Type 2 for Leica M mount. This lens I was primarily using for stills on my Leica MP240. It was my everyday lens, captured everything with it, and then adapted it to the Sony a6700, just kind of for shits and giggles. The lens is really sharp. The lens is a lot more modern looking than the Canon FD. Perfect for the rangefinder system because it has this focus tab built in. And with that focus tab, it offers a very natural focusing experience on the rangefinder body. On the Sony a6700, it does kind of translate, but obviously you don't have a rangefinder system. Using this lens every day with the Leica though, I got very used to where the focus is going to be, so it actually wasn't that difficult shooting it on the Sony a6700. Because I'm so used to zone focusing with that lens, I had a general ballpark idea of, okay, this is 1 meter, this is 2 meters. And so I felt like I could actually shoot a little bit faster with the Voigtlander compared to the Canon FD system because of that. Because again, manual focus on the Sony, not the best experience because the EVF is a little bit subpar, and then the back screen as well, not very good. What I will say though is that because the Sony a6700's small form factor, the Voigtlander was really nice to use. The lens is very small, so even if you adapt it, it doesn't protrude to a very weird distance. It just seems like a very natural pairing with that camera. But again, that lens is much better suited for rangefinders, so I don't know, it's more of a fun lens to use on that system. On the video side of things, don't really shoot through the EVF. With video, I tend to use the back screen, if not something larger like an external monitor. When you're doing that and using the focus tab though, I don't know, something about that experience doesn't really make sense to me. It feels off, it doesn't feel right. Maybe that's just a matter of getting used to it, but it's something I noticed. I much prefer the more traditional focus ring of something like this Canon FD lens. That being said, the video side of things, similar to photo, it's a more modern rendering, so it's definitely a different look compared to something like the Canon FDs. I would say that because it's a little bit more modern though, it lacks a little bit of character, so I think I would naturally gravitate towards more just native Sony E-mount glass rather than adapting that Voigtlander to the Sony system, because it doesn't necessarily offer anything that you're going to miss out on native glass. But again, to kind of play devil's advocate, it's more of a modern rendering, but I think when we compare it to something like the Sigma 18-50, it's not as clinical for some reason. I'm not quite sure what that can be attributed to, and maybe it's just my own brain playing tricks on me, but it does feel a little different. Next lens is Sigma 18-50. So this is actually my second copy of the lens. I think in my initial review of the 6700, or kind of initial impressions, I had mentioned I was a little disappointed with this lens because of its autofocus performance. People commented and some people reached out to me and said, hey, my lens doesn't do that. You should get it checked out or try to replace it. So that's actually what I ended up doing, is I returned that copy, got a new copy, and it was actually a lot better from what I recall than that first copy. So much so that I think the 18-50 is a no-brainer lens. It's one of those safe workhorse lenses in that it can do pretty much everything that you want. The close focusing distance is really good. By the way, close focus distance, Canon FD, very nice. Voigtlander, not as much. Sigma 18-50, can't remember the exact distance, but that was also very good. Very versatile lens. It's a nice zoom range, 2.8, constant aperture. Can't remember what the weather sealing situation was like. I think it had a rubber gasket on the back. It's one of those lenses that can just live on your camera and you know that you're covered for 90% of applications. In the same vein, it's a very safe and clinical good lens in that you're not going to get special character. And I say that not as a bad thing, but more just be aware of that. That's the look that you're going to get. It's going to be very polished, very clean. People will say that it's very clinical, but it is very sharp. It's just a very all-around wonderful lens to use. Next, let's go to the opposite of that spectrum. A lens with a ton of character, horrible vignetting, horrible flaring, but something about it was actually very, very fun to use. This lens is the Pergear 12mm f2 for E-mount. This is an APS-C lens, much like the Sigma 18-50. The Canon FD was full frame, Voigtlander 35 is full frame. When I initially reviewed it, I don't really remember anything striking about it. It was just like a very cheap lens, budget lens that worked when you needed it to work. Very wide and very fast, so roughly 18 f2 in terms of light gathering. But for some reason on the Sony a6700, it just really, something clicked. It's a very fun lens, and I actually really enjoy the rendering, even with all of its imperfections. Very soft, again, very bad vignetting, but surprisingly, I don't know, if you push the colors a little bit in the grade, it just really sings. It's lots of character, very fun lens to use, very easy lens to use because it's so wide as well. So even though this is a manual focus lens, not that hard to get things in focus because it's so wide. Last lens we're talking about is also a manual focus lens, and it's something that I wish I'd used a little bit more. I just recently sold it. It's the 7 Artisan 75mm f1.25. On Sony a6700, gonna be a very long reaching lens. I brought it out for a second at this event that I was photographing, but I think after a couple of shots, I just put it down. It wasn't a good experience because, again, the EVF. That a6700 EVF is so tiny. If you're comfortable with that and you enjoy that experience, then yeah, this lens might be good for you. Shooting wide open at 1.25, obviously, you're going to get very soft images, but stopping down, the lens actually becomes quite a bit sharper. I initially picked it up from a friend for my Leica MP240. For the rangefinder experience, not the best. And then photo with EVF, again, I just don't like shooting that way, so really the application for me with that lens is for video. The reason I'm saying that I wish I'd held on to it a little bit more is that I actually adapted it to my Nikon Z8 and used it for a couple of clips for video. On video, I actually quite enjoy that lens. It feels substantial, there's some decent weight to it. The focus ring is smooth and I like the aperture ring as well. I really like that focal length when it's a full frame camera. So on the Nikon Z8, it was actually very nice. It felt a little bit too tight when I was using it on the Sony a6700. On the Nikon Z8 feels just right. Getting really nice compression, getting very nice fall off as well with this lens, and it doesn't break the bank. It's very affordable. I am hesitant to recommend using it with the Sony a6700 because it's a bit of a more hefty lens. It doesn't balance that well, but it's an interesting one. I think it tends to render a little bit green, but that's easily fixed in post. But that's it. Those lenses I found to be very interesting. So if you're on the hunt for something interesting to add, maybe give one of them a try. All of them can be found for less than $1,000. Canon FD, especially the 28mm, you can find for under $100 Canadian. Voigtlander used, you can pick one up around 700, 800, I believe, Canadian. The Pergear, I forget the price, but it was very affordable as well. Sigma 18-50, I think is around like $500 to $700 range. The 7 Artisans, I think you can pick them up around the $500 range as well, new, but you can definitely find cheaper ones used. As always, thank you for your time. Be well. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.